Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we're going to be taking a look finally at broadwell-e processors. Now these are a new set of processors released for the X99 chipset platform. So it's the X99 chipset and it's the 2011 platform. I say obviously, but it is the DDR4 variant because we've obviously 2011 thankfully is one of the sockets that's come with us for quite a while. So right from the very beginning we do have new processors. There are new motherboards as well. I've got a couple of them on the side, and later on we'll actually be talking about the X99 A2 from Asus, because that's the board that I used for all of my testing. Maybe strange that I used lower end board, but I will explain. But the most important thing here and now is there are new X99 boards out there, but the CPUs themselves don't actually require the new ones. If you can pick yourself up a used second-hand one, then all of the vendors are going to hate me for telling you that you will be able to update the BIOS and the new processors will work and they're fine. What this also does mean is if you've already got an X99 set up with a 5920K or a 5930K, for example, and you're all DDR4'd up already, because you do need one of the 2011 3 boards, which are the newer ones with X99. If you have one of those boards already, then you can successfully update to one of these. Now, when you go through the update, it's important to say most of the boards, and I have tried it, with a selection, but obviously not everyone that's out there. Most of the boards, if you haven't updated the BIOS, when you pop the new CPU in, it gives you a little flag up to say that you need to update the BIOS to be able to get the maximum performance from your new CPU. It's a very easy process. One of the things I would say is if you've not done it before, probably, I mean, it's a scary place to be, but the BIOS is the easiest and safest place to do it. If you do go into the BIOS, you can just go to the tools and you've normally got a little flash bit of software in there somewhere, and it's just as simple as downloading the BIOS from online, from your motherboard vendor website. Put that file, and only that file, on your USB drive, pop it in one of the little connections at the back. Bob's your mother's brother. It really isn't that difficult. And one of the things I can say, which I will cover later on as well, is for the first few months of a new product, it's going to be important to keep on top of your BIOS updates as well, which I will talk about, as I said, more later on. But more about the processors. We've got the processor, and I've got them all here in the plastic because at the end of the day, when it comes to processors, they're not much to look at. The heatsink on these has changed a little. So the information, with what's going on actually underneath the heatsink, it's actually been quite difficult to get some confirmed answers on. So that's something that I'll probably end up covering in a later video if I can do that for you all. But we have new processors. So we have a complete range of processors now in 2011. We've got 2 6 cores, we have 2 8 cores. No, we have 2 6 cores, an 8 core and a 10 core. I probably should have started with my stuff around the right way in the first place, but anyway. So at the bottom of the table we have the 6 core processor, which is the 6850K. This is the only one that's different from the rest of the pack in that it's only got 28 PCI Express lanes. So with the PCI Express lanes, best way I can put it is with your graphics card in the top slot, that is going to use 16 PCI Express lanes. With the Z170 chipset, they've only got 16 PCI Express lanes in total. So if you chuck a second card in the second slot, they both run at 8 times. And this is genuinely where the 2011 stuff, they go that little step further because they do have those extras. With the 28 lanes, what you'll do is the top card will run at 16 and the second one will run at 8. But with the 40 lane ones, what you get is both the 2 cards, if you're going to run 2, they both get 16 lanes each, and they gobble up 32 of those PCI Express lanes in total, and then the leftovers are there for your things like your U.2 and your other PCI Express 3 bandwidth hungry things. And at the moment it's really about drives. So if you've got a U.2 drive or an M.2 drive, then that's going to be gobbling up at least 4 of your PCI Express 3 lanes each. So that's something to keep in mind with this, because the Z170, when that came through, essentially Z170 came with 20 PCI Express 3 lanes on the chipset itself. With the 2011 stuff, you get at least on the native stuff, so without any extra chips and stuff like that, you don't get any additional PCI Express lanes. They're all on the CPU itself, which is why you do have so many. So the 6800K is really the kind of bottom of the rung processor, and it's what I would also personally say as to being the single graphics card chip. I don't see the point in spending a lot of money, because you can see the prices down the side of the graph. I don't see the point in spending so much money on a full setup like this and then not having those PCI Express lanes available. That's completely down to you though. If you're happy with your, for argument's sake, Fury X or 1080 only getting half the bandwidth that it could possibly be, then that's completely down to you. I'm not sure that we're entirely at the point of graphics cards completely saturating an 8 times bandwidth yet. But if it was me personally, I'd rather spend a few more quid and know that it was getting the full 16. And that's where the other processors come in. When we bring the graph back up, you got the 6850K, which is the 40 lane, the first 40 lane processor, and it's probably the new processor in the lineup as well, because it's 6 cores and 12 threads with those 40 lanes, and it's got 3.6 gigahertz, which they say is it's the turbo speed. But it's 3.4 and then it turbos up to 3.6. We've then got the 8 core, which is 3.2 gigahertz and turbos up to 3.7. And then which is the 8 core is pretty much the 5960X replacement. The 6 core would be our 5930K replacement as well. But we now have a new behemoth at the top of the pack, which is the 6950X at the top. 10 cores, 20 threads, 25 mega cache, and it's all a bit bonkers mental. So when we do go into the talking about, oh look me, graph's gone, yeah, yes. Right, so when we do go in, and yes, I have got some notes here because I really can't remember everything, or I don't script stuff, but it's just a quick flash up so that you can see that we've got, gives you the details that I've shown you before, but it's the official Intel one, that we've got all those threads, all those cores. It's the first mention of Intel Turbo Boost Max, which I will talk to you about, and Tri-Gate, what does it call it? Tri-Gate 3D transistors. Right, so we get rid of all of that. So first things first, Turbo Boost Max. What the bejesus is Turbo Boost Max? We'll just add more stuff. It's Intel Turbo Boost Max Volume 3, go buy it now. It's new in the shops. Essentially, what it is you get the turbo boost. So with the 10 core, it's 3 gigahertz, and then it boosts up to 3.5. But what the Turbo Boost Max does is it gives you a single core, which will then ramp it up to 4 gigahertz. So if you had a processor, if you're working on something that was single threaded, one of those cores would go shazam, and it would go up to 4 gigahertz, which sounds wicked, and it really is, but it's only one core. But this is where it gets really complicated, and it's also something that I've had to fiddle around with my tests on the actual bench rig that we'll talk about when it does come back up onto the table, is that at least with the Acer stuff, and I wouldn't be surprised if all the others follow suit as well, because to be fair, it will make everything sit down in the graphs if it doesn't run like this. But with the Asus boards, it essentially syncs all of the cores up to the max turbo. So when the turbo kicks in, they can all run up to 4 gigahertz rather than just a single thread. So essentially, in the grand scheme of things, if you get yourself a decent motherboard rather than some cheap one, and when I say decent motherboard, I'm on about like the main vendors, and when I say cheap motherboard, I'm on about something that you might find at a PC fair. But to be fair, if you're spending this sort of money, you're not going to be spending £100 on a motherboard. But anyway, with the good motherboards, they're then going to essentially give you, out of the box, without doing any work, a 4 gigahertz processor. And that goes across the range as well, because this is something that I was quite impressed with. It doesn't matter, because I've tested, as you've probably seen it in the graph at the top, I've tested the 6850K, I've tested the 6900K, and I've tested the 6950X. I've done all three. I was mental. I stayed up late, lots and lots and lots. So with the three processors, every single one of them ran quite comfortably at 4 gigahertz. And with the BIOS, like I said, it then made all of those cores run at 4 gigahertz, not just a single one. Maybe some clever BIOS munching going on in there, but like I said, I think all of the big brands will all end up doing that, because if they don't, then one of the boards will look like it's performing an awful lot worse than the others. But when I did do my testing, and I will tell you this now, when I did do my testing, what I did is I actually turned off the Turbo Boost Max. So I only run my 10 core at 3.5. So it was the 6950X was 3.5, the 6900K was at 3.7, and the 6850K was at 3.6. Why did I do this? It was so that later on, when I go into testing the boards individually, that we'll be able to see the differences there. And it gives us a really nice baseline. So I've brought the test rig up onto the table to show you, and this is what I used to test all of the 3 CPUs that we had in. And essentially it's the X99A2. It's not the bottom of the range one from Asus, it's the next one up. It's the one that kind of, if you're looking to build maybe like a gaming rig or something like that, it's like a nice stepping stone in. It's the one I kind of prefer, and I like to go with a bottom end board because, as I said, when we start testing the other boards later on, both from Asus, more expensive, and the other brands, what it means is I have a decent baseline no matter which processor I end up carrying forward to do the rest of the testing with, because I'm obviously not going to test 3 CPUs every time I test a board, but it's more than likely going to be the 10 core. What it means is I've got a decent baseline. And then also, that is why when I ran my tests, which I need to scream and shout at you. You can click the link and go underneath, and you can go and see it on the OC3D website. We've got all of our tests there. We've started running some new ones. We are just secretly in the background now starting to run some new games. And when we have a few motherboards running in there, you'll see the new graphs and stuff pop up. But essentially, this is just our baseline. We're still running the good old 980. Again, what this does is by keeping the graphics card consistent, it means that the graphs are all comparable. If I'd have chucked a 1080 in there, which is on the shelf, if I'd chucked a 1080 in there, then suddenly the graphs kind of are almost a bit worthless. But so we've got the X99A2 in there. I've got a Corsair RMI 1000 power supply. And then we have a whole selection of memory that we've been running. But the cooling was taken care of by a H110i GT. Now cooling, I can honestly say that cooling was actually quite consistent with all of the processors. But the 10 core, obviously, with more stuff going on, was the warmest of the lot. And even with the overclock that we'll talk about in a second, even with the overclock, we were hitting a maximum below 75 degrees, which sounds like a lot, but you do need to remember you've got 10 thumping cores here, and when you hear the volts that I put through it, you'll understand why I was actually quite impressed with floating between sort of 70 and 75 degrees as being a great temperature, considering I've just got off the shelf, nice and easy, click, bosh, do you know what I mean? It's all the type of stuff that you can get. If I'd used a lower end processor, then fair enough. But the most important thing is, if you're going to be spending this sort of money on a processor, then I would probably suggest that you need to make sure that you have some decent cooling. You are still trying to cool 10 cores underneath this. Doesn't matter how efficient stuff gets, there's still a lot of computing power underneath this. So you either need to get yourself an incredibly healthy air cooler or some AIO stuff, but a lot of you are going to end up running water cooling, like dedicated water cooling anyway. But that's only really going to differentiate out if you then decide that you're going to crank some volts through it. The rest of the test kit that we had. Now this is, I do like to explain my stuff so you can understand the amount of work that we go in. I've got a 2800 megahertz kit of Corsair LPX. It's the normal kind of, it's 16, 18, 18, 36, 1.2 volt Corsair LPX. So what I ended up doing is this was actually our stock kit. And by stock, what I mean is it's quite commonplace for people to use kind of like 2400 megahertz or maybe 2666 megahertz kits. And they do all their testing on that. But we've been for quite some time running quite extreme kits to be able, and you're now thinking to yourself, extreme kits, it's 2800, but give me a chance. We run quite extreme kits because it does actually help us be able to distinguish not so much between the CPUs at the start, but later on when we start talking about motherboards. By running all these different memory kits, it genuinely does help us be able to distinguish between the boards which are better and not. Because really, when it comes to memory compatibility, it actually does come down to the board and, more importantly, the BIOS itself. So 2800 megahertz, we stick this in, and for our stock run, I literally go in, click XMP, come back out. Although with these, I actually had to manually make sure that they weren't going to be turboing up to the 40, because that's kind of, like I said, that's not processor performance. That would then have been artificially inflated by the Asus BIOS. So I was trying to make it fairer for these as a baseline, so that then when we do go and do the boards later on, you'll understand why it's running a bit better, and it's just, anyway, you get what I'm on about. So 2800 megahertz. So that's that one. But then what we actually do is I've got other kits as well. G-Skill sent me this 3200 megahertz kit it's a Trident Z kit. So we run some tests with that, and we'll talk about that. We've also got a 3600 megahertz kit from Corsair. This is Dominator Platinum. It's got the red bars on the top, and we've also got a kit in the case now, which is it's the new ROG memory, basically. It's 3200 megahertz, and it's got red lights rather than white lights. Why all this chat about memory though, Tom? Well, something that I have noticed, and it's not just with the Asus kit, because this isn't the first of the new X99 boards that I've worked with, is that they are still clamping down on the BIOS, which is why I mentioned to you earlier that you're going to need to stay on top of your BIOS if you're going to be using this stuff. The BIOS that we have with this is still a 0. It starts with a 0 BIOS, which essentially means it's pre-release. And the problem with pre-release, and this is the first time I've ever come across this, but because it's pre-release, it means that the memory QVL isn't that great yet. So it's all down with memory timings and sub-timings and cache multipliers, and it all gets very complicated. But essentially, best way I can put it is things are a little bit picky with memory at the moment. Corsair this kit runs absolutely fine. 3600 megahertz kit, which are going to be screaming at the screen now and saying, oh yeah, but it's too fast, Tom. I couldn't even get it running with it on XMP and then turning the memory timing back to something like 3000. It just wasn't having any of it. And it's just, it's nothing wrong with the memory, it's nothing wrong with the board, it's just little BIOS glitches at the moment. And it's not just this board that I've seen it with, because I've been doing a lot of testing on boards in the last few weeks, which is why I've been quiet. And it's just essentially we're waiting for that final BIOS to come out. Now, I do need to be very, very clear. I'm experiencing this stuff because I've had the pleasure of working with it early. When you guys get your motherboard, if you go and buy one of these new boards, then you're, or even updating your BIOS on the old ones to work with broadwell-e, you're going to be going in with all of the QVL and all the little issues that I'm finding now. That should all be fixed. Every time that I've found a problem, I've been relaying the kit numbers back, and it's all been getting updated. But obviously, when I'm under such a short period of time for me to actually be able to get this testing done, I can't wait 24 or 36 hours for one kit each time, and then we go and find other ones. But anyway, so at the time of testing, one of the things I do need to be clear about is I did run the Trident Z, but the scores that were coming out with the Trident Z were actually a bit down on what we would expect for that kind of speed. One of the Corsair LPX kits as well, the 3200 megahertz LPX kits, was exactly the same. So it's, like I said, it's down to QVL. It will be fixed. It wasn't at the time. So what I've ended up doing, especially where I couldn't get the 3600 to run for love nor money, but I don't mean at 3600 megahertz. Like I said, I even went down to 2800 megahertz, which we know the CPU is able to do. and I just couldn't get them to boot, and the board wasn't having any of it. So I've got this 3200 megahertz kit, and that was put in when we dropped that 3200 megahertz kit. It was scoring significantly more than the G-Skill was. Now that isn't a G-Skill problem, it's just, like I said, it's a QVL problem. But it was working better, so that meant that was the kit that I went with for my 3200 megahertz runs. So 3200 megahertz XMP, literally just went into the BIOS, selected XMP, F10 out, push, spun, and it booted. Every single one of the processors booted. The 6950X though, what I then started doing was going up, and I ended up managing to get a 3400 megahertz screen grab, and essentially all I did was select 3200 under XMP, then I went to 3400 and just clicked it in, and it booted fine. Now this, and it was stable as well, so this tells me, and this is why I've been trying to explain about all of this, this tells me that the CPU is very capable memory-wise. And I'm very much looking forward to when the newer BIOSes come out, and it means I can get to grips with, you know, one of the later boards. It will then mean that this 3600 megahertz kit will then come into play, because I will be able to go back and turn it down to 3200 megahertz and work my way up. So most important thing that I'm trying to say to you here is I've got a 3200 megahertz kit, runs fine, runs awesome, but then I also managed to overclock it to 3400 megahertz, and I am more than confident enough to say that the limitation was then the memory and not the processor. So I'm hoping to later, like I said, when we get some BIOSes, go through memory again, probably on a different board, and I'll be able to report back to you about how much there is in these processors. Because the most important thing is, I personally think that we're going to be looking at 3400 megahertz plus XMPable, or, you know, if we can get 3600 megahertz running with some manual tweaking, then I will do a guide on how to do it. But obviously this is all going to be down to the silicon lottery anyway. So I went through a lot of time and messing around to be able to get this done for you. When we come into the process as well, I spoke to you about temperatures and that type of thing. Now, the motherboards, when they're left at stock, so when you go into the BIOS and it says auto volts, basically what auto means is it's not a set fixed. And a lot of people come and ask for advice on the Overclock 3D forums, and they say, oh yeah, I've got a 4.4 gigahertz overclock and I'm at stock volts. Processor's amazing, I've got to be able to get 5. But what you actually need to do is open CPU-Z up and see what your voltage actually is, because auto means that the motherboard and the BIOS can actually overvolt it for you. It's like these processors all came running about 1.225 to 1.24 volts, depending on the load that was being put through the system. That was what they were running at. But I know from our previous experience, and the fact that we do this with most of our CPU reviews, is that they don't necessarily need that much. And it's always the first part of the overclocking that I work through, and I actually start to underclock. So what I did is I took the turbo off of the 10 core. So we were just running, we did the 3.5, sorry. So it's just the normal turbo and not then the 4 gigahertz turbo. And then with the 3.5 gigahertz, I worked down to see the absolute lowest possible volts that I could put through that CPU and it still be stable. And the lowest volts that I got to run at was a single volt. 1 volt, that's it. And it ran at 3.5, all 10 cores, and it was 100% stable. Then I thought to myself, well, we'll enable that 4 gigahertz because other people might not want to go and change multipliers and stuff, and we'll see what we can get the 4 gigahertz to run at. And 4 gigahertz was 100% stable at 1.1 volts. And I did all kinds of stress testing and benchmark, folding at home, X264, all kinds of stuff to try and make it wobble at 1.1, and it was 100% stable. So then, the fact that I then know that it will do 4 gigahertz at 1.1 volts, and this is why I always tell people to underclock before they overvolt, is I actually know that from that point onwards, I know where my CPU baseline is. Sadly, with the overclocking on these, they all, and this is one of the things I'm actually really impressed with, because it does mean that they've all been ridiculously well binned off. They all did 4.4 gigahertz at 1.3 volts. Now, one of the things I can't stress enough is that when you start to overclock at home, go through and work through it slowly. I am going to do an X99 overclocking guide, because there are several lots of voltages that you need to take under manual control to be able to get the best from your system. We've got the cache volt that you're going to need to be able to grab hold of. But the cache volts is all to do with memory, and you need to get that dialed in manually. You've got the cache volts, you've got the VCCIO volts, and there's another one that I'm having a complete mind blank on, the system agent volt. So you've got system agent, VCCIO, and the cache volts. And you need to go in and learn how much you need to put through those, because your boards will all massively overvolt those. And if you rein them in, you can reduce your temperatures, and also it's going to improve the lifespan of your product as well. So I will do a guide later on, and really the VCCIO, the system agent, and the cache are all massively linked into your memory. So the faster that you have the memory running, the more those volts need to be played with to get the system stable. Now, I did manage to get mine 100% stable, and we went through, and I had, I've told you about the 3400 megahertz memory, but our final clocks across the board, we ran 4.4 on all of them. The 6950X, which is the 10 core, the 6900K, which is the 8 core, we actually then increased the cache multiplier as well, up to 35. The cache multiplier unlocks basically better scores with with the memory. So you got that run at 3500 megahertz. And then with the little baby 6 core, the 6850K, that we could only get the multiplier notched up to 34. So it was 3400 megahertz, 3.4 gigahertz, whatever you want to call it. So we did that. They were all 100% stable, all dialed in, temperatures well under check with the H100i GT. But like I said, when I do a guide on these, I'll teach you how you can work out how to set yours up all individually on your own. I will say that these three processors, with all the memory and everything, I've probably invested about 6, maybe 7 days in this in total, and that's just the testing and, you know, getting this video done. That's without the website work and all the other sort of stuff. But anyway, as you would expect, scores with a 10 core are rather healthy. And if I bring you up the Cinebench R15, we've gone with a newer one, but the most important thing with this graph is the fact that we've got quite a few processors in there, and you can see right at the top the 6950X overclock is the top two. You've then got the 5960X and the 6900K with their overclocks trading blows, but if you go a little further down, you can see that the 5960X is actually just behind the 6900K, which is where we would expect it. And then when you go a little bit further down, you get the 6850K is quite a bit in front of the 5820K, because the 5820K is the older variant of the kind of the lower end processor in the 2011 lineup. So in here, there's no like massive like jump out leap forward. Other than those, you've got the extra cores at the top, which is where you would expect it. But the old 8 core and the old 6 core, there is a performance difference. You can see that there's a little bit there, but it's not like it's not enormous. When we move on to Prime 95, I love Prime 95. It's so old, but we still run it. And the scores that the 6950X popped out were just ridiculous, and you can see it at the top. And again there, when you break it down, it does all kind of fit into where you would expect it, other than the 6850K was giving the 5960X a severe run for its money on this one. When we do talk about the graphs and everything like this, don't forget you can click through to the Overclock 3D website. You can go and see all of the other tests that we've done with all the PC marks and all of the other benchmarks, and you can also see our full written rundown of the results as well. When we move on, I'm going to splash this up for you quick, because this is one of the benchmarks that we are running, and it's one of the new ones, and we're just kind of testing it out at the moment, and it's Geekbench. I'm going to hold my breath with Geekbench until I've got a few more results on it. But the most important one that we do need to show you is gaming. Now, the gaming, we've been running these games for a little while, and we are just introducing some that are much more CPU dependent. But with these games, they pretty much talk for about 90% of the other games on the market. There are very few that are massively CPU dependent. But the general rule of thumb is when it comes to games, it really doesn't matter what CPU you've got. The most important thing that you can take from a CPU most of the time is core speed, but adding actual physical cores in doesn't make a huge amount of difference, which is why when we say about a dedicated gaming PC, and I do mean gaming PC, not kind of like streaming and all the other sort of stuff, a dedicated gaming PC, quite often, more often than not, you'll find that something, and you can see it in the graph, something like the 6600K is actually a little Billy bargain. I mean, we've got i3s in the graph here that have actually done better game results than the 5960X. Plain difference was a GPU driver update. And you can see there, right at the bottom, 5960X is putting out scores worse than an i3. And that's just because you don't necessarily need an immense amount of cores just to actually play a game. So really what we need to do now is I need to have a drink of water, because I've obviously been talking for an awful long time, and then we need to start talking conclusion. Okay then, so conclusion time. Now, I'm going to go with the awards and then we're going to break it down, and I'm actually going to try and advise you as best as I can which processor might be right for you as well. Now the 6850X, 6950X, I do apologise, 10 cores, 20 threads, absolute bonkers mental, comes with an absolutely eye-watering price tag, and at this present moment in time I've not got any pound signs that I can talk to you about, but I do know this is rumoured to be coming in between $1,500 and $1,600 for your CPU. To be honest with you, I don't want to say you get what you pay for, but you've got a 10 core product that a few years ago, say a couple of years ago, you would have been looking at a 10 core Xeon and it would have cost twice this amount. The difference between this and a Xeon is overclocking and a much higher memory compatibility as well. They say 2400 megahertz, and the Xeons, trying to get them running above 2400 megahertz is a bit of a pain, and a lot of the BIOSes on the Xeon boards are actually locked down to not even let you have anything above 2133. So with this, I've already told you 3400 megahertz, and I can't wait to get new BIOSes so I can try that 3600 megahertz kit without issues, so I can see what it's really capable of. So you've essentially got an overclocking Xeon spec product that you can run ridiculous memory on, but it will empty your wallet for the privilege. And we would say this deserves the OC3D enthusiast grade, because it's, like I said, it's eye-wateringly expensive, but it's pretty much the best CPU on the planet. Now, the other two, I actually think that if you have to have 2011, and you're looking at dual graphics, because for me personally, if you're gonna buy one of these processors and it's a gaming rig that you're talking about, this 6850K is the little jewel in the lineup. With those 40 PCI Express lanes that I talked to you about, that's going to mean that your two graphics cards, no matter what graphics cards that you have, whether you, like I said, you have a Fury X or you're running 1080s or you're waiting for graphics cards that are going to be coming later on, those graphics cards are going to be getting 16 PCI Express lanes each. And when we're talking about a gaming rig, which is what I said, that's really the only reason to jump in on 2011 is to make sure that they're being fed properly. You've obviously still got 6 cores and 12 threads, so if you do go into like streaming or like Twitch and all that type of stuff, maybe you've got a green screen, webcam green screen, all that type of thing, then you're going to be getting your graphics cards all the grunt that they want. You're going to have some cores there as well, because you know, most games aren't really going to be using the cores, and you know, you've got all the PCI Express lanes, like I said. The 6950X is really like ridiculous overkill. But if you are like my buddy Mark Purdy, Valkyria, go and look him up on Twitch. This is the processor that he wants, and he's going to be getting some serious EPing over, because it's going to mean that when he's doing all his twitching, he's going to have literally massive overkill processors available to him. And it's also going to mean that things aren't going to slow down. Most importantly, when you start to transcode your videos to go onto YouTube later maybe, or you're doing when you're gaming and you're like saving all the stuff in the background to save your video footage, it's the CPU isn't going to be the reason why you've got dips in the frame rate because you're videoing at the same time, because this is just going to be sat in the background going because there's so much going on. The one in the middle, the 5960X replacement, when you compare the direct competitors, there is a marginal difference. A lot of the talk that Intel was saying about there's a 30% upgrade from this generation to the last generation, yeah, you're right, there is a difference from this generation to last generation, because they were putting a 10 core against a 6 or an 8 core from the last generation. So the 10 core is blatantly going to be significantly faster. That's, you know, there's not a great deal to say about that. They chuck more cores in, Bob's your mother's brother, that's where the speed comes from. When you put them direct next to each other, there is a marginal small difference. It's single-digit percentage. And to be honest with you, if you have to buy new, then you just kind of decide 6 or 8. I actually think for most people, gaming rig, then the 6850K is the sweet spot. The 6800K, I'm genuinely, the fact that it's only got those 28 lanes, I would this is the one that I would stump up for. The only time that you need to start thinking 8 or 10 core is if you're doing lots of 3D rendering. You're like Wraith on the forums, where you've got so many Blender things, and like you're doing like 3D models and all that type of thing. Maybe, like I've said, Twitch, or essentially it's massive CPU intensive tasks. That's when you pump up to these ones. If you're just going to stick a couple of graphics cards in it and shout at your mates down TeamSpeak or something like that, then seriously the 6850K is the one that you want. And really, I see this, and it's the best way that I can explain it as well, is if you remember the 5930K from the previous generation, which was it was kind of the middle range one. Well, this is like a cheaper version of that, but you get the extra, you've still got the thread. So rather than having to go the cheap end of the scale, which was the 5820K, this is kind of the one that I see as being a really good new introduction at a decent price. And it's where I think most people will end up spending their money. The other two are just literally their EPing CPUs. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm going to be all over the 6950X in my new rig, and that's because I'm rendering videos and I'm doing graphic work and I'm doing loads of CPU intensive tasks. So this is going to be perfect for me in a workstation based environment with a bit of light gaming on the side. So really that's where I'm going to leave it with you. I've yabbered on enough. This gets the Enthusiast Award, and I would honestly say, as strange as it sounds, that the 6850K would get our gamer's choice, because that's where I think sensible money is. I've been trying to think of a better award for it, because it's not value for money or anything like that. It would have been when we did do gold, silver, bronze, because we don't do gold, silver, bronze awards anymore. This would have actually ended up being my gold award winner. So maybe gamer's choice, stroke value for money, but it's obviously ridiculously expensive. But you understand where I'm coming from. I've yabbered on enough. I've hopefully got the amount of work across that I've done with these processors, because it's been literally, it's been my life for the last week, and it's been insane trying to do 3 processors so fast, especially when BIOSes haven't been right and memory's not been playing ball. But when we do the motherboard reviews that are going to be coming out later on, I've actually got the Strix Gaming that I've done a lot of testing on already. In fact, it's pretty much complete, that I'm hoping that I can do some more on with quicker memory. But I do have some other brands that we're going to be looking at as well. We've already done one of the MSI boards, but we're going to be looking at a lot of other ones. I've got a lot of stuff coming, basically, but I've got some exciting stuff for you coming up in the not too distant future. I hope you enjoyed this. I would love to hear your feedback underneath. I know this isn't a 9-minute video that some other people might do, but I have tried to cram in so much into this video and actually give you some in-depth thoughts rather than just chucking some numbers at you and letting you get on with it. So I hope that does come across. I'm sorry it's a long one, but at the end of the day, if you're going to spend $1,600 on something like this, I'd like to think that you'd like to spend a little bit of time watching a video like this one, where I've literally put so much work into trying to find out whether it's the right one for you or not. So that's all your details. It's blown my mind. It's blown my social life for the last week. I definitely need to go to bed. But for now, at least, this is Tiny Tom Logan with his Broadwell-e roundup for you, out. Ding! Dong!